Hi, welcome back to the Camp Chaos Chronicles. And on this episode of Slideshow Bob, we're going to take a look at a project that I did several years ago that was a pretty important project for me. And if you're a Jag guy, I think you'll find it interesting as well. Dang it. Now, the project got started back in 2010. I had finally gotten my Jaguar XJS track car ready for its first outing on the track, and I was invited by a company that I had a little work done for me out in the western suburbs to attend their track day up at Brainerd International Raceway. And it was a really good day, one of my best. And my friend Dave Kennedy accompanied me up there. He'd been a club racer in Ford Spec for a lot of years, and he was up there to give me encouragement and to show me the ropes around the track. So it was a really good day. And unbeknownst to me, I had made a pretty good impression on the owner of the company and some people that worked there as far as my capabilities was concerned, whether I deserved it or not. Now, in the winter of 2011, I had this company doing some work for me. The manager of the company was somebody that I'd known for several years at that point, and he was a Jaguar guy, so I had him set up a differential for me, which I had never really done before. And so I called out there to find out how the progress was going, and they said he doesn't work here anymore. So I called him, and we had lunch, and he said, yeah, we had a difference of opinion on how this ought to be run, and we parted company. Now, I said that it was an amicable breakup, and probably should have happened, but his one regret of the whole situation was that he wasn't going to have an opportunity to build a Jaguar E-Type race car for the 2011 Monterey Motorsport Reunion E-Type Invitational. That year just happened to be the 50th anniversary of the initiation of production of the E-Type. And really, I'm the only guy in the Twin City area that can build that car. Well, after that, I went out to the shop to pick up my differential, and got to talking to Alan Peterson, who was the interim shop manager, and he just showed me the kind of disarray that the shop was in at that time, and walked me around looking at different projects and so forth. And I said, Al, if I live closer, I'd love to help you out with this. And he said, well, there's something you do for me that would really, really help. And so he walked me into a back room in the shop, and there was that E-Type that I had been told about. It was up on jack stands, body work had been done, beautiful $12,000 aluminum bonnet was leaning up against the wall, and there was a Terry Tough 3.8 liter XK engine sitting on a bench. If you'd finish this project for me, you'd be my hero. And I thought about it for about a half a second, and I said, Al, if I live closer, maybe this is an option, but I don't see how I can do this. And I was actually kind of relieved, because it was a big project, and the words, I'm the only guy that can build this E-Type in the Twin Cities, kind of was in the back of my mind at that point. So I went home, and I got to thinking about it. And I then remembered a quote by Sir Richard Bronson. If you're presented with an opportunity, take it and learn how to do it later. And that really stuck with me. And finally I determined, you know what, I got to do this. I can't just stay at the level I'm at right now. I've got too much in this experience that I'm having, and if I can make this work out, this would take me to the next level. This would take me 2 levels up, maybe 3. So the next day I called him up and said, yep, I'll do it, but I don't do electrical. Now from this point on, you're going to have to cut me a little slack as far as video quality is concerned and some of the pictures, because I couldn't find many of these clips except for YouTube, so I had to download videos that I had uploaded to YouTube and then back down again, and it's going to be obvious which ones are which. Be kind. So I walk into the shop on Monday morning, and this is the first thing I see. This is a stack of Ferrari 250 GTO parts that had been cut off of the shop owner's original 250 GTO back in the day, and they were now being shipped out to the person that now owns the car because he wanted it returned absolutely as much as possible to the original. And Alan informed me that you could probably buy a new Lamborghini Gallardo for what that stuff is worth. And it occurred to me at that point that we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. This is the state of the car. When I signed out of the project, we had a complete Terry Tough Racing Engines 3.8 liter Jag. Needed a few things, but pretty much ready to go. We've got the suspension and the front picture frame all laid out. The front subframes I bolted on to get a feeling like something was actually being done. And the dry sump oil tank had been set in place. And as you can see here, the roll bar and supporting structure had been already put in. This was done by Johnny Rice, and he did some other fabrication projects on the car, and it really looked good. And the IRS unit was underneath it with a few modifications done to that. A easy bleed system for the rear brakes was installed, and at this point it kind of looked like a car. And you can see over in the corner there, we got a $12,000 aluminum bonnet that came on the lightweight E-types back in the day. And we had everything we needed to make this car happen. Now that I had the front subframes permanently attached, then it was time to begin to assemble the front suspension, which required the installation of the picture frame, the rectangular frame that goes between the front subframes. And also there's a trapeze, as it's called. That is that triangular sided structure that fits on the front of the picture frame that the bonnet rotates up and down on. And once that was in place, then that provided the points where the suspension could be hung on. And you can see the torsion bars that run parallel to the lower tube on the front subframes. And we're ready to finally assemble the front end there, get everything torqued in place, and start working on the brakes. Now, there's nothing magic about the brakes in the front, except for the fact that I believe that they were S-type or Mark 10 brakes, which were a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier duty, although they're not vented by any means. And so it's a pretty straightforward setup, with the exception of the pads, which were for racing purposes. The next project dealing with the brakes was the assembly of the pedal box, which at the time was not assembled, and it was kind of in a box, and I had to figure out how to put that together, which is easy enough to find online. It was then an easy process to simply take hardline, connect all the brakes to the cylinders, and pressure test them and put fluid in them, and you know what? They all worked. I turned my attention to the engine at that point, and as I said earlier, this is a 3.8 liter Jaguar XK engine from the early 1960s, and it was built for racing purposes by Bill Terry of Terry Tough Racing Engines, and Bill is considered the top XK racing engine person in the country. And you can see some of the upgrades that have been done to the engine. First of all, we've got a set of 3 Weber DCOE carburetors that replace, I believe, the original SU carburetors, and of course the upgraded linkage and a number of other things. You can also see the plate on the side of the engine that replaces the original oil filter casting, because the engine had been converted to a dry sump system, and so you can see that there's a blanking plate on the side with the fitting that the oil line feeding the engine is going to be attached to. On the other side of the engine, you can see a number of things. First of all, the most obvious is the beautiful tri-Y headers that Bill Terry provides for these engines. Up front, you can see the dry sump system pump stack that is going to replace the stock lubrication system. At this point, I'm starting to get pretty excited that we're going to be able to put the engine in the car pretty soon, and that's going to be kind of a milestone. Before we did that, though, there was some work to be done on the front of the engine. As you can see, there's a number of things here that, if you're familiar with these Jag engines, they don't quite look the same as the stock unit. First of all, that big black pulley that you see in the middle of the picture, that is what's called a racemate alternator. And the racemate alternator is actually inside of that big hub there. This pulley drives not only that alternator but also the water pump. So it's really kind of a great thing to sort of simplify the componentry on the front of the engine. Now the issue is that it was driven by a serpentine belt off the end of the crankshaft. And the problem was that the original idler pulley on the Jaguar engine actually, instead of pushing in on this belt, pulled out on the stock V-belt. So what I did was to essentially take and reverse the spring on the setup, and I forget exactly what the fabrication was involved in that. But then what I had to do is to go into my local CarQuest Auto Parts store and go through their shelf of idler pulleys to come up with one that is going to be of the proper diameter and the proper width, and looks like it's going to be beefy enough to take the strain of that tensioner, because the spring on that was pretty tough. So you can also see the machined aluminum hub in the center of the crankshaft pulley down at the bottom of the engine, and the cog belt that goes up to the dry sump oil system. That's how it's driven. Now we were ready to do the trial fit of the engine in the car, and so we bolted on the bell housing and the transmission and protected everything with cargo quilts and began the process of installing it in the engine. However, there was a problem, and it was something that was going to keep me busy for the next 3 days. And that problem was that the opening of the transmission tunnel in the cabin of the car was not wide enough to accommodate the Tremec T5 5-speed transmission that was going to be installed in the car. So that's a problem. And what that required was to reshape that opening. And what we're talking about here is the 75th Jaguar E-Type produced in 1961. And what we've got to do is we got to start chopping this thing up. And I've never done that before, and it was kind of a gut check to take a spot weld cutter to the seams on this part of the car. But the truth is, it wasn't really that big a deal. The two sides of the opening converged toward the top, and right where the vertical sides of the tunnel met the circular portion at the top, it was just a simple matter of cutting the spot welds, moving those sides to vertical, and then just bending the flanges over in a sensitive manner and spot welding them back in place. Pretty easy, really. And in the end, no one would be the wiser. The transmission cover in the cabin was another story, and a fiberglass reproduction had been produced to replace a steel unit which was no longer on the premises. And due to the fact that the transmission tunnel sides had been moved at the firewall to a vertical position from their angled inward orientation, the fiberglass piece no longer fit. So what that involved was to pretty much split it down the middle, except at the very rear, and bolt it in place, back up the pie wedge shaped slot in the middle, and then close up the gap with fiberglass. And it took a little time, but it was a pretty easy operation. And then we were able to finally get the engine installed in the car. At least the front motor mounts bolted up. The issue at this point was to actually get the engine bolted in with the proper downward angle so that the drive shaft angularity would be correct. And with the advice of Bill Terry, who served as a really important resource during the course of the construction of this car, he advised us to install the engine with the rear of the cam covers a quarter of an inch lower than they were at the front, and that would give us the proper drive shaft angularity. And so once we got that in position with a hydraulic jack under the oil pan of the engine, we were then able to design and build a transmission mount for the back of the transmission and eventually get the engine in its final orientation in the car. And now it's time to turn our attention to the cooling system. The owner of the vehicle had secured a custom radiator from Howe Racing Supply and also a cooling fan. And it was a fairly simple matter to bend up some brackets, drill a few holes, and secure it to the mounting lugs on the top and the bottom of the radiator. The engine's back in after some adjustments to a number of things that would enable it to actually fit in the car. This video is going to be a before picture of what things looked like before I plumb up all the different lines. There's the dry sump oil system there. Challenge is going to be to get lines to and from that. And fuel system is just about done. That long line you see hanging down there, all that has to happen there is that this gets hooked to that, and we've got a complete fuel system. So it's in again, and this time I mean it. It's bolted down tight. We'll show an after video in a little bit here. Well, the dry sump system installation after video never actually got done, but what you can see here is what it looked like when it was completed. And you've got the tank there, and you've got that line, actually two lines that go into a Y that actually goes to the tank, where the oil from the scavenging pumps that suck the oil out of the crankcase delivers it to the tank. And then there's another one down below on the tank that goes to the pressure stage of the dry sump pump, which you can see sort of coming out at the front of the forward set of 3 header tubes. And that goes down then to the Canton oil filter, that blue unit that you see bolted to the front of that trapeze right in front of the radiator there. And from there it goes to the cooler, which is that black square thing, and then from there it comes out of the cooler and goes to the blanking plate on the right side of the block where the oil filter casting used to be. And got a complete system, and it eventually ended up working. Which, the interesting thing about this oil sump setup was that I've never done one before, and I'd go home at the end of the day with a problem and I'd research it overnight, and then I'd go back the next day and work out a solution. So a bit of a stressor, but I learned a lot about race car preparation during the course of that project. Now, before I started the engine, I wanted to get an exhaust system hooked up, and I had to fabricate it. There was really nothing available that I could find that really would work the way that I wanted it to, so the only option was to fabricate it myself. And what I did is used a process that has worked really well for me in a number of situations. I make a wooden fixture out of plywood or MDF and pieces of 2x4, and This would be, of course, after getting under the car and doing all my measurements and figuring out what the best way would be to provide an ample clearance, but at the same time not have it too far away from the bottom of the vehicle. And then began to cut up mandrel bends and pieces of straight tube to make up an exhaust system. Now, I wasn't going to actually do the welding myself. The owner of the vehicle had a guy that does all his welding, so all I had to do was just tack everything together and bring it over to the welder. And ultimately, he did a good job and got it back to us fairly quickly, and we were able to put it on the car. Now, in the back of the car, there's a hanger there that the stock one wasn't going to work, so I fabricated my own out of a couple pieces of angle that I cut out of a piece of square aluminum tubing and a couple of rubber biscuits and a number of bolts, and it ended up looking pretty good, and it actually worked well besides. Well, there it is, folks. First time with 4 wheels on it in 8 years. Got to the point today where we were almost ready to run it, just a little bit of wiring that needed to be done. But since nobody ordered the oil for it, we decided to put it off until, well, Thursday. I've got something I got to do tomorrow, but it's pretty much ready to go. A few minor issues here and there, but fuel system's ready, lube system's ready, cooling's ready, and it's going to be pretty exciting. So, car's up, running, and driving. That's the good news. The bad news is there's about 3 days left before we need to put this thing on the trailer to Monterey. And the old saying, 90% done, 90% to go, wasn't quite that bad, but it was, at that point, I was just absolutely burned out. The shop is a mess. Parts are getting mixed up between projects, and it was, you know, to the point where the car would be assembled and it would be drivable, but we had decided that the car was actually going to be for display purposes only, and at that point that was about the best we could do. So, but at that point, something wonderful happened. Now, if you like the Slideshow Bob videos, like, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, and leave us a comment down below so we can know what we can do to do better. So if you want to see the rest of the story, we'll see you the next time on the Camp Chaos Chronicles.